My name's David, and if you'd asked anyone in my family, they'd have told you I was the quiet one. The black sheep, they'd joke, except it wasn't really a joke. Not in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where every Sunday dinner felt like a performance and I was always sitting a little too far from the spotlight. I wasn't rebellious, not loud, not difficult. I was invisible. It wasn't always that way, or maybe it was and I just didn't notice until I got older. As a kid, I thought I was just quieter than my cousins, less eager to shout over everyone for attention. But by the time I hit 35, it was undeniable. I could walk into a room and nobody's conversation would pause. My news barely raised an eyebrow. And honestly, I had learned to live with that. Except Grandpa. Grandpa saw me. He was the only one who'd pull me aside after the chaos of family gatherings, pour me a glass of his homebrewed apple cider, and ask questions nobody else bothered to ask. How's the writing going, David? Still playing guitar? Got any good stories for me? He never judged when I told him I was still working a dead-end job at the bookstore. He never made that tight-lipped smile the way my dad did whenever I admitted I wasn't married, or hadn't bought a house yet, or wasn't exactly climbing the ladder. He just listened. And that, well, it meant everything. But the first sign of trouble? It came the day I found out Grandpa had passed. And not from the grief alone, but from the way the phone call was delivered. My sister Lisa didn't call to tell me. She texted, "Grandpa's gone. Thought you'd want to know." That was it. 6 words. No offer to pick me up. No, come home. Just a heads up, like I was an afterthought in my own family's obituary. I stared at that message for a long time, and something in me cracked right then. Little did I know, it was only the beginning. The funeral was exactly what I expected. Formal, stiff, distant. The church in Bridgeport was filled, sure, but not with people who really knew him. Just family friends, neighbors, old acquaintances who came out of obligation more than love. I sat near the back. Nobody saved me a seat up front. Nobody even noticed I'd walked in, or maybe they noticed and chose not to. It didn't matter anymore. The only thing I kept thinking was he deserved better. Grandpa was a man who'd built things with his hands, who grew tomatoes in the backyard until the very end, who could fix a broken chair like it was an act of love. But they turned him into a framed photo at the altar and a 10-minute eulogy where no one even mentioned the stories he used to tell. After the burial, the family gathered at my parents' house, and it was like nothing had happened. Cousins laughing in the kitchen, Lisa scrolling on her phone, my uncle loudly debating sports on the couch. I stood in the doorway, watching, feeling like an outsider inside my own bloodline. Then Uncle Frank raised his glass and announced, "Tomorrow's the will reading. We'll see what the old man left behind." That was the moment. The way they all paused, hopeful, greedy, expectant. I could see it in their eyes. My dad smirked like he already knew the outcome. Lisa shrugged, sipping her wine. Eric, my cousin, fist bumped someone across the room. I didn't say a word. Just quietly left, went home, and sat in the dark, thinking. They were all so sure. So certain that whatever Grandpa left behind, it was theirs. And deep down, a small, guilty part of me hoped they were wrong. The lawyer's office sat in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. I got there early the next morning, but they were already there. My dad, Lisa, Uncle Frank, and the rest of them, huddled together like sharks waiting for chum. "David," my dad said when he saw me, nodding like I was a stranger he vaguely recognized. Lisa barely looked up from her phone. Uncle Frank gave me a tight, polite smile that didn't touch his eyes. I took the seat farthest from them. I wasn't expecting much. I'd made peace with being invisible. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, walked in holding a thick folder. "Thank you all for coming. Let's get started." The air shifted. Everyone leaned forward. He opened the folder and started reading. I heard familiar names, my dad, Lisa, Frank, even cousins I hadn't seen in years, each getting a polite mention, a modest sum, a watch here, a painting there. Nothing big, nothing life-changing. Then he paused, looked up, adjusted his glasses. And the house, along with the entirety of Mr. Samuel Clark's estate, including all financial assets and personal belongings, is left to David Clark. Silence. I swear, for a moment, even the air stopped moving. "What?" my dad barked, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. Lisa's phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the tile. Uncle Frank leaned forward, his mouth actually hanging open. The lawyer didn't flinch. "It's all here. Mr. Clark also recorded a video testimony, which we'll watch now." He pressed play, and there was Grandpa on the screen, sitting in his old recliner, wearing that same plaid shirt he always wore in the garden. His eyes twinkled, but his voice was steady. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I've kicked the bucket, and you're all probably wondering why I did what I did." I swallowed hard. Every eye in the room turned toward me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible anymore. Grandpa's voice filled the room, steady but warm. Now, I know some of you are probably upset right now, maybe even feeling betrayed. But let me tell you why I left everything to David. He leaned closer to the camera, like he was talking to us across the dinner table. David, you've been the quiet one all your life. And I see how this family's treated you. They overlooked you because you didn't demand attention. But you showed up. Every holiday, every weekend when no one else bothered. You listened to my old stories. You helped me weed the garden when my back gave out. You brought me soup when I was sick, even when you had to leave work early to do it. I felt my throat tightening, heat rising in my chest. Grandpa went on, his voice growing firmer. I know your father thinks you're weak because you're gentle. I know your sister thinks you're boring because you're quiet. But you've got something they don't. Loyalty, heart, and a kind of strength they never understood. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My dad's jaw clenched, his fists balled tight. Frank muttered something under his breath, but nobody dared speak louder. Eric, Grandpa's voice dropped a note deeper. I hope you turn your life around, kid. But I wasn't going to leave my house to someone who only shows up when there's something to gain. You got a lot of growing up to do. He sighed then, leaning back. Maybe this isn't what you expected, but this is what I decided. David, I hope you make this place your home. Don't sell it to appease anyone. Don't feel guilty. This is yours. He smiled faintly, then nodded to the camera. All right. Guess that's all from me. I'll be seeing you on the other side, kiddo. The screen went black. For a long time, no one spoke. Just the hum of the old air conditioner in the corner. Then my dad slammed his hand on the table. This isn't right, he growled. We'll contest it. Mr. Peterson shook his head calmly. Mr. Clark made this will airtight. He also filed it directly with the probate court last year. And this video, legally binding testimony. There's no contest. Lisa's face twisted into something bitter. You don't even want that house, she snapped at me. You're gonna let it rot? What's the point? I stood, my voice soft but steady. It's not about the house. I looked at each of them. It's about him finally seeing me. And with that, I turned and walked out of the office, leaving the echoes of their outrage behind me. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I drove to the house. Grandpa's house. It was waiting for me, like it always had been. The porch light still worked. His old rocking chair still sat out front. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The next morning, I woke to knocking. Not polite knocking, the kind that rattles the old wooden door like they meant to break it down. I hadn't even unpacked my bag yet. I'd fallen asleep in Grandpa's old recliner, the TV still on, muted. I pulled myself up, heart already sinking because I knew who it had to be. Sure enough, when I opened the door, there they were. My dad, Lisa, and Uncle Frank, standing on the porch like an army. Dad's face was tight, lips a thin line. Lisa had sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. Frank had his hands in his coat pockets, rocking on his heels. David, Dad started, voice controlled but strained. We need to talk. I didn't step aside. We're talking. He exhaled sharply. Don't be difficult. Can we come in? I hesitated, then stepped back. Let them in. They walked in like they still owned the place, their footsteps familiar in a house they hadn't set foot in for years. Lisa wrinkled her nose at the old curtains. Frank looked around like he was already measuring what could be sold. Dad didn't bother sitting. He faced me, crossing his arms. Listen, this situation, it's not fair. Not fair. I echoed quietly. You don't even have the means to keep this place up, he continued. Do you know how much property taxes run here? Upkeep? It's not practical. Lisa chimed in from the couch. You're not even settled, David. You rent an apartment. You can't handle a whole house. Just sell it. Split it with us. It's the right thing to do. Frank nodded solemnly. Your grandpa didn't think it through. He was old. Sentimental. He didn't mean for you to carry all this burden alone. And there it was. Not even 24 hours and already the manipulation had begun. I stood by the window, looking out at Grandpa's yard, overgrown but still beautiful to me. The old oak tree, the rusted swing, the garden bed waiting for spring. I'm not selling, I said quietly. Dad's face darkened. Don't be stubborn. I'm not. I turned to face them. He asked me not to. He told me in that video. Lisa threw up her hands. That video doesn't count as gospel. He wasn't thinking straight. I smiled faintly. He thought straighter than any of you. Silence. Tense. Heavy. Then Dad's voice lowered. You'll regret this, David. Don't shut out your family over some misguided loyalty. I swallowed hard, feeling that old ache in my chest. The ache of always being the outsider. Of always being the one who gave more than he got. But for once, I wasn't bending. You already shut me out a long time ago, I said softly. I'm just finally locking the door. And as they stood there, Speechless, I realized something. They hadn't just lost a house. They'd lost me. They left like a storm rolling out, doors slamming hard enough to shake the frames, their voices trailing down the street as they piled into Dad's car. I stood at the window and watched them drive away, dust curling in their wake, Lisa's silhouette flicking me off through the rear windshield. Real mature, I thought. I sank into Grandpa's old chair, the one where he'd spent most evenings watching ball games with the sound low, his thoughts louder than the TV. The cushion sagged just enough to feel like an embrace. Around me, the house still wore his fingerprints, the mug on the windowsill, the half-finished crossword on the end table, the faint smell of his cologne in the hallway. And then I saw it. An envelope. Right in the center of the coffee table. My name scrawled across it in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, bold and a little crooked. How had I missed it last night? Or maybe I hadn't been ready to see it until now. I picked it up slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hands like it carried more than paper. Inside, a letter, written on that old cream stationery he always used, the kind that yellowed at the edges but felt solid beneath your fingers. David, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry, kid. Sorry I couldn't clean up the mess I left behind. Sorry I had to leave you to face them. I swallowed hard, reading on. I know they'll come for you. I know they'll try every angle. Guilt, flattery, threats. But I chose you not because you needed help, not because you were weak, but because you earned it. You were the only one who stood beside me without asking for anything. Every quiet kindness, every time you showed up when no one else did, that's why. I could almost hear his voice woven between the words, warm and steady. I hope you'll stay here. I hope this house becomes your peace. But no matter what happens, don't let them take it from you. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. This is yours, David, not theirs. My eyes stung. There's a key in the kitchen drawer. To the old shed. I left something for you there. He'd signed it the way he always signed my birthday cards. Love you, kid. Grandpa. I pressed the letter against my chest, closing my eyes, breathing it in like it could fill the hollows they'd carved in me. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer. The key was waiting. And with it, the next chapter. The key felt heavier than it looked. I stood in the kitchen, turning it in my hand, tracing the worn grooves with my thumb. For something so small, it carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. Grandpa had left me the house, sure, but this key? This was something different. This was a secret. Outside, the wind stirred the branches against the windows. I pulled on his old jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs, and the smell of sawdust still clinging to the lining, and stepped into the yard. The sky had thickened, clouds piling low and dark, and the air held that waiting silence before a storm. The shed sat at the far edge of the yard, crouched beneath the old oak like it was hiding. Its walls were silvered with age, boards splitting, the doors sagging on one hinge. The roof bowed in the middle, but it still held. Somehow, it still stood. I crossed the yard slowly, boots crunching over brittle leaves. When I reached the door, I slipped the key into the rusted lock. It fought me at first, stubborn like Grandpa could be. Then, with a reluctant groan, it turned. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, it wasn't what I'd expected. I'd imagined clutter, cobwebs, forgotten junk piled in corners. But instead, everything was organized with quiet precision. Shelves lined the walls, each jar labeled in his careful handwriting: screws, nails, buttons, fishing hooks. The old workbench stood solid under the window, tools hung neatly above it, their outlines faint on the wall from years of use. A stool waited beneath the bench, cushion flattened into the shape of a man who sat there often. And in the center of the floor, a wooden box. Simple, worn, locked with a brass latch. On top of it, a folded note. For David. Open when you're ready. I crouched down beside it, heart knocking hard against my ribs. My fingers hovered over the latch, hesitating. Then I opened it. The scent of cedar rose up, sharp and clean. Inside, letters. Dozens of them, tied in bundles with string. Each labeled by year, starting from when I was a boy. The top envelope bore my name. I lifted it out with shaking hands, unfolded it carefully. David, it read. I started writing these when you were 12. I figured, maybe someday you'd want to know what I saw in you, even when nobody else did. Each letter in this box is a piece of that. A map, if you ever need it. A way back to yourself. I sat back on my heels, staring at the words, the letters piled beneath. And for the first time since he left, I didn't feel so alone. I sat there on the shed floor for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands, reading and rereading the words. Each time I traced his handwriting, it felt like he was speaking straight into the hollow places nobody had ever filled. I glanced at the other bundles in the box, ears of his voice, waiting for me. A lifetime stored in paper and ink. But for now, I held only this first letter, and it felt heavier than any inheritance. Outside, rain had started, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the old tin roof. I leaned back against the wall, listening. It felt right, somehow, to stay there a little longer. I read the letter one more time before folding it carefully and sliding it back into its envelope. Then I picked up the next letter in the stack. The one labeled Year 13. David, it began again. This year I watched you win that spelling bee, even though you said you didn't care. I saw the way you looked down at your feet when they handed you the ribbon, like you were embarrassed to be seen. I wish you could have seen what I saw. A boy who stood steady even when nobody cheered. A lump rose in my throat. You've got a quiet kind of courage, David. It's not flashy, not loud, but it's real. And one day, it's going to carry you further than you think. I set the letter down, blinking fast. He had been watching all along. Every year, every moment I thought had gone unnoticed, he had been there. The rain thickened, hammering the roof harder, dripping down the corners of the shed. I stayed seated, surrounded by the smell of cedar, the soft rustle of paper. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. Didn't feel like I had to defend my choices. Here, in this small space, with his words wrapping around me like a blanket, I felt seen. Truly seen. And I realized. Maybe this inheritance wasn't the house. Maybe it wasn't the money, or the land, or the legal papers. Maybe it was this. A legacy written in quiet words, year by year, telling me a truth I'd forgotten. I had always mattered, even when nobody said it aloud. Especially then. I don't know how long I stayed in the shed, surrounded by those letters, the smell of cedar, and the steady drum of rain overhead. Time felt different inside those walls, like the shed had its own heartbeat, keeping me safe in its rhythm. But eventually, the rain softened, and the sky outside began to pale. I gathered the letters carefully, returned them to the box, and locked it again. I carried it inside the house like it was something sacred. I set it on Grandpa's old armchair and stood looking at it. This was mine. Not just legally, not just in writing, but deeply, quietly mine. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the rain drip from the porch roof. For the first time in days, my breathing felt steady. I wasn't thinking about lawyers, about family fights, about proving myself. I wasn't thinking about them at all. Until the knock came. It wasn't frantic like before. This one was softer. Hesitant. I opened the door. And there was Lisa. She stood alone on the porch, arms crossed tight, her face blotchy like she'd been crying in the car before working up the nerve to come here. Her mascara had smudged beneath her eyes. She wasn't wearing her usual sunglasses. David, she said quietly. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around like she was seeing the house for the first time. Her eyes paused on the framed photo of Grandpa on the mantel, then on the armchair with the box. I didn't come to fight, she said, voice thin. I swear. I nodded, staying quiet. She sat down at the kitchen table, twisting her hands in her lap. Dad's madder than I've ever seen him. Frank too. They're already talking lawyers. Talking to the others. I think. They're serious. I leaned against the doorframe. I know. She looked up at me, something fragile in her expression. I don't agree with them, David. I didn't say anything before. I didn't stand up for you. I don't know why. Maybe I was scared of Dad. Maybe I just didn't want the fight. But it wasn't right. I studied her face. She looked younger than I remembered. Or maybe just smaller, sitting there without the armor of our family behind her. I read the will, she said softly. I watched the video again. He chose you for a reason. I swallowed, my throat tight. She pressed her palms together. I don't want to fight. I don't want a lawyer. I don't want the house. I want to not lose my brother. The words hung between us, delicate as spun glass. For a long moment, I said nothing. And then I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Neither do I said. And for the first time in years. I meant it. We sat there in silence for a long time, Lisa and I, the quiet between us not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. Like we were both learning how to sit in the same room without the noise of everyone else's expectations pressing in. She traced circles on the table with her finger. Do you remember, she said finally, how we used to sit out back with Grandpa and count stars? Before? Everything. I did. God, I did. It hit me so fast I had to look down at my hands to steady myself. I remembered those summer nights when we were kids and the world hadn't divided us yet. Grandpa with his flashlight, pointing out constellations, making up names for the ones that didn't fit the charts. Lisa giggling, falling asleep on the porch swing. Me trying to stay awake just a little longer to hear one more story. Yeah, I said quietly. I remember. She wiped at her eyes. I miss that. I miss when it wasn't so hard to be family. Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt a heaviness in my chest, not anger, not pity, just sadness. A mourning for what could have been, what was lost along the way. They won't stop, She added, glancing toward the door, meaning Dad and Frank and whoever else was circling. They're not going to let this go. I know, I said. You're really going to fight them? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I'm not fighting them, Lisa. I'm just not giving up what he gave me. She looked down, biting her lip. Do you want me to stay out of it? I shook my head. I don't want you to pick sides. I just want you to be my sister again. For a moment, her face softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. I think I'd like that. We sat there a while longer. No demands. No negotiations. Just two people who'd grown up in the same messy family, trying to find a bridge back to each other. And outside, the rain had stopped. A thin light broke through the clouds, painting a faint glow across the porch. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the weight begin to lift. Not gone, but lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, this house wasn't just a fight waiting to happen. Maybe it could be the place where something finally healed. Later that night, after Lisa had gone, after we'd shared tea and a few quiet memories, and she'd hugged me goodbye at the door with a grip that felt more like an apology than words could carry, I sat alone in the living room. The house was still. Not empty. Just still. I could feel Grandpa on the walls and the floorboards, and the way the lamp on the side table flickered like it always had. I could almost hear him humming from the kitchen, smell the faint trace of coffee even though the pot was cold. And for the first time, the house didn't feel like a battleground waiting to erupt. It felt like what he'd always wanted it to be. A refuge. I sat with the box of letters in my lap, tracing the lid with my fingertips, knowing that each letter inside was another story waiting for me. Another step back to the version of myself he'd always believed in. Outside, the yard was quiet under the moonlight. The old oak stretched its branches wide, standing guard like it had for decades. I thought about how many nights Grandpa must have sat out there, looking up at those same stars, wondering what kind of man I'd become. And I realized, maybe this house wasn't just a gift. Maybe it was a challenge. A challenge to stay, to build something here. Not for them. For me. For the boy I used to be, counting stars with Grandpa's hand resting warm on my shoulder. For the man I was still learning to become. Tomorrow, they'd come back. With papers. With lawyers. With arguments. I wasn't naive. I knew the fight wasn't over. But tonight was mine. I leaned back in Grandpa's old chair, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, the creak of the settling house, the steady tick of the clock above the mantel. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission to feel at home. I was home. No one could take that from me. Not anymore.